Hi there, I'm Dr. Myrdalis Diaz, and this is the Design Your Physician Life podcast. Welcome to this episode brought to you by our Maxillary Mastermind, an exclusive development program for physicians who want to learn about entrepreneurship. Today, we have a very special guest, Dr. Liz Aguirre. We had a great conversation with Dr. Aguirre about designing a career as a speaker. Are you ready? Let's go.
Welcome to the Design Your Physician Life podcast, where you will get excited about being a physician, learn the tools that can help boost your success, and great tips from successful doctors. Join us to unlock the keys to an amazing physician life. And now, here's your host, Dr. Myrdalis Diaz Ramirez.
Hey guys, Welcome to today's episode. I'm super excited. I have here a physician who, her and myself have been together in different groups, and I've seen her growth during the last year, which has been great. Dr. Liz Aguirre is an accomplished speaker who is changing the definition of success. As a 2-time TEDx speaker and semi-finalist for Grant Cardone's Great American Speak-Off, she has proven that her outside-the-box thinking is worthy of attention. After experiencing professional burnout for a third time, she knew that it was time to face her fears and refocus her efforts in a new direction. This is on a mission to help other professionals find success in their careers without the overwhelm and burnout. She has spoken for numerous professional conferences and frequently makes podcast guest appearances. She's also the host of Liz Aguirre MD YouTube channel and the Creating Clarity podcast. Thank you for being here, Liz Aguirre.
Thank you so much for having me. Now, you do know you can say Aguirre. I don't say that
Aguirre,
often.
Aguirre.
Yes. When I introduce myself, there's a lot of history behind that. And part of it, when I was growing up, my dad grew up in a time where he used to have his hands swatted when he would speak Spanish. And so it was like a big no-no. He grew up in the Valley in Texas. And in the Valley, you would have thought, oh, that's totally acceptable. But for his time and place, it wasn't. And then my mom, who didn't have great English or great Spanish, so very much in my youth and growing up, my norm was to not speak Spanish, and you don't even try, and that's not part of our lives. And this is a little tidbit that most people don't know, is my dad's last name was Moreno, and he dropped the ending of it. And so that's why my maiden name is M-O-R-E, More. And when I married my husband, who's Aguirre, I had to really I had a little bit of internal conflict about what that meant for me, because, I'm brown. My last name is Aguirre. And if I'm not speaking Spanish, then, it was just a little kind of feeling where I didn't feel like I fit in anywhere. So
we cannot hold this interview in Spanish. Is that what you're telling me?
Yeah, no, we couldn't. And you know what, even though and that has been one of those things that has been important to me. I went to Costa Rica to learn medical Spanish so that I could communicate at some level with my patients. And then I went to Argentina for 6 weeks and did some submersion. And my kids are now taking Spanish because I really feel like, man, the Spanish culture, there are so many youth that are not speaking Spanish, and myself included. I did not grow up speaking Spanish. So, there's a lot who are just kind of that broken in between, I don't really speak Spanish, even though they kind of can, like myself, but then you're embarrassed because it's not great. And so, we could not hold the episode in Spanish, but all that to say, for all those people who are kind of feeling like, man, I kind of feel like I just don't fit in some places. I think all of us have those kind of worries and fears and, feelings at some point in our life.
Well, that's okay. We won't do it in Spanish, and you're fitting here quite well, okay? As a physician and the career that you're growing as becoming a speaker, you're doing quite well in English. Thank you. No problem.
Thank you.
Let's talk about, because you spoke about your parents. Tell us a little bit about background. You said that your mom didn't speak any Spanish or English very well. And your father was in a position where no Spanish, to speak. So I'm thinking they were not physicians, they were not in the medical field, correct?
Well, it's so interesting. No, they were not physicians, but my dad was an interesting character. Like a lot of who I am and my personality and my ability to put myself out there came from my dad. And he has a very interesting background. I won't go into that other than to say he was a pharmacist and he went to pharmacy school. And then when we were very young still, he stopped practicing altogether. And it was kind of like, I don't know if when you were younger, you saw that show Rags to Riches. Well, I kind of feel like it was opposite for us. We went from having a very nice childhood until I was about in second grade. And then after that, it was just, it was really bad. Like we went from having a very nice home and Christmas gifts, and my dad used to buy everybody on the block ice cream when the ice cream truck would come, to being homeless and living in a tent for a while. And then eventually, where most of my childhood was spent is an abandoned clinic. It used to be a hospital in my small town of Poteet, Texas. And it's really interesting because a lot of people want to know about that piece of history, and I never wanted to talk about it. And the reason is, for everybody else, it was like kind of cool. You lived in this big building. And for me, it was like there was nothing cool about holes in the ceiling and water dripping from it and rodents the size of cats running by. Like, to me, it was a very traumatizing experience. But for everybody on the outside, they thought, oh, that's cool. I want to go in there. And there was no way I was ever going to let anybody in our house. So, yeah, it was a tough childhood. But throughout all of that, my dad always said, like, God will take care of us. And I truly believe that God takes care of us. And, but I was just a little challenged by some of the decisions he made to go from us being okay to not. And that's a really important part of my history, because I realized, and this comes out in the last TED Talk that I did, that fear that came from my childhood, never wanting to ever worry about food again, or be homeless again, or have to rely on other people again, that was my drive to succeed. It was also what drove me into burnout 3 times again. And I didn't realize it, but what happened for me and what happens for so many people that I've realized is it's fear that's driving our actions. We're not actually doing the things that we want in life, the things that are going to make us happy, where we get stuck going down this path. And then we get into that point where we say, I don't have a choice. You don't understand. It's not that easy. And those are all the things that I would say to myself, and I really believed it. But the truth is, we always have a choice. And sometimes we just don't recognize those subconscious fears that are driving our choices, that become, part of our everyday choices that they just are, without us even realizing it. So yeah,
how do you get from an abandoned hospital with rats around you to medical school? How does that happen?
Well, again, there was a very traumatizing event. And I won't talk about it just because I said it on my TED Talk. I shared that. It was a very vulnerable place for me. And I want you all to please support me, the physician community, and listen to that when it comes out. But it was a very traumatic event. And as I was laying on the ground crying, it still gets me emotional, because I made up in my mind in that exact moment. I was 10 years old, and I made up my mind that I was never going to live like that again. And I didn't know I was going to go on to become a physician. I have a brother who has cerebral palsy, and he doesn't walk, talk, peg tube, wheelchair bound. And throughout his childhood, I was always at his doctor appointments. I went to his physical therapy appointments. I did all of those things. my mom was the one who always went. And again, she didn't have the best English. She didn't have the best Spanish. And so there was a kind of a disconnect between her understanding of what was going on and what I was hearing. So it was often me kind of saying, no, Mom, this is what they're trying to say. And so then I got very much into the medical space because of my brother. And then when I graduated, there was not a question of whether I was going to go to college. I didn't know how I was going to do it. I didn't have any money. I didn't even have a car to get to college. So this happened, this traumatic event, when I was 10. At 11, I started, by 11, I was like working regular jobs. And I saved $500, got my first little Ford Escort car, and I drove myself to the edge of San Antonio for community college. And, it was just like, I had so many stumbling blocks. I didn't know. Like, I got some scholarships to universities. I didn't know you had to apply to university. So I didn't get those scholarships because I never applied. And so I was like, wow, I thought if I got a scholarship, I got in. But no, you actually have to apply to the college. So there was a lot of stumbling blocks, and I just kept getting up. And I got financial aid, fortunately. That helped. I worked 2 full-time jobs. One of my weekend jobs, I was working as a unit secretary in a hospital. And if you've been practicing long enough, you remember like what unit clerks did in the hospital. They would take the doctor's orders, they would transcribe them for the nurses, and then the nurses would follow through and implement those orders. And I just remember thinking, oh my goodness, this is the most interesting thing. And so it's like, wait a minute, why are you giving this medicine? And like, I would ask these questions. Why are you giving this Lasix? And why are you giving fluids too? And like, while I was an undergrad, I already started to understand these concepts. And so then I never told anybody.
How old were you when you were a unit clerk?
When I was the unit clerk, I was like 19 or 20. I was already in college, and I was doing that and customer service at the same time. But yeah, it was like 19 or 20. I forget exactly the age, but it was right around 20 years old. And so I was already connecting the dots, and there was so much that language that I had already heard through appointments with my brother and that kind of stuff. But I still never thought I was going to medical school. But then as my dad started getting sick, and I became involved with his care, my dad was always saying, you should go to medical school. No. I thought I was going to go to physical therapy school because, I did that with my brother. Then I thought, well, maybe I'll go to nursing school because there is, I had a lot of interaction with nurses, and I thought I can do that. And then it changed to PA school, then it changed to medical school. But I remember I joined pre-med in undergrad. And so I remember saying, yes, I'm going to try to go to medical school. And I was in with another group of pre-med students. And one day I was walking up, and they said, I heard someone say, can you believe Liz thinks she's going to medical school? And I was just like, oh, I'm never saying it again. I'm never telling anybody. And with the exception of my boyfriend at the time, nobody knew I was trying to get into medical school, and I was applying. And I mean, there's so many stories around that. I won't go into depth about any one of them because I'm telling you, along the way, I had so many stumbling blocks. I had the president of one of the medical schools tell me, never apply with these test scores. You're never going to get in. And I was just like, well, I'm going to apply, and then I'll apply next year and show my perseverance, and I'll do whatever it takes. And yeah, that's kind of my road. But that work harder approach, that approach in my mind that I have to work harder than everybody else and I'm never going to give up no matter what, that served me during that period of time. But it's also what led to my burnout 3 times. And there comes a point in our future where we have to recognize that our past no longer defines us. And I was letting my past define me well into my professional career. I never thought I was good enough in medical school. I was always afraid my classmates would figure out that I grew up poor and that I didn't have their test scores. And I was always afraid that when I was getting pimped on the rounds that
now they all know.
Yeah, like that's how it is. And we really think that everybody else has it figured out, and that's just so far from the truth.
Exactly. So, did you have a mentor? Did you have, besides this desire, this internal desire, did you have somebody who guided you during that period of time, or was this all driven just by this fear? It doesn't matter. I'm just going to do whatever it takes and
Yep.
just figure it out.
Yeah. So I have to tell you, I cannot advocate for mentors enough because I did not have a mentor. And I realized, gosh, this would have been so much easier if I had had a mentor. Now, I think the reason I was able to succeed is because my dad had such a big belief in me. And anytime I would talk to him about any negativity that would come out of my mouth about, no, I don't think I should do that, Dad, or why I shouldn't do this, like he would squash it. Like the negative self-talk or the negative self-talk that was fed by other people, he would squash it. He would not allow that, and he would remind me why that was not true. And I think that's part of the reason my feeling of imposterism and self-doubt resurfaced at the end of medical school, because my dad died my 4th year of medical school. And then there were a few years where it was just like nothing but that negative self-talk just kind of exploding in my head. And why I think in the last few years it's changed is I married an amazing man, and who's very much like, I would say he's decades ahead of me in the mindset space. And he used to tell me at the beginning of our marriage, we've been married for 12 years, together 14 years. And at the beginning of our marriage, he used to say, babe, you're coming with me. And I never understood what that meant. But along this journey, anytime the negative stuff would come out, he would say, I'm just going to remind you, you're a doctor, like a real medical doctor. I'm just going to remind you of that. And I'm going to remind you what you told me, that less than 2% of the United States population of physicians are Hispanic females. I'm just going to remind you that you did that, and you're capable of way more than you're giving yourself credit for. And so he slowly and surely started like evolving the way I thought again. And so like he's never been like forcing me to think a different way or like imposing his beliefs on me. The only thing he was doing is kind of indirectly coaching me without me even realizing it, calling out those limiting thoughts and limiting beliefs and saying, now, do you really think that's true? And let's look at what you have done. And if you remind yourself of that, do you think that's true? And he's done those things along the way. And it's really helped me. And I stopped resisting it, I think, when I discovered coaching, because now somebody else besides my husband and my dad was telling me these things. And so that, I think, really just kind of catapulted things in the last year and a half for me.
Yeah, and it's been amazing. I've seen your growth. I've seen how you've, from being curious and having a dream, how things have changed, doing the podcast and then going into the TED Talks. We basically go to very similar groups. And I've seen that growth, and that's been amazing. Before we get into this latest stage in your life, let's explore those episodes of burnout and tell us about your specialty, how you chose it, and what led you to the first episode of burnout.
Okay, yes. So the first episode of burnout, I went through medical school and it was really hard. Really, really hard. I felt like I had to work harder than everybody else. And that's probably not true, but that's what my mind was telling me. And I don't remember thinking I'm burned out, but I had no kids. I had no spouse. I had nothing to worry about except getting myself together, learning, and showing up, right? That's what I had to do. And so for me, the most important part of that period was making sure I learned how to be a great physician, learning to make sure that I was really going to be able to help people and make a difference. And at that point, I was like, it's really not about me. It's making sure that I don't negatively impact somebody else's life while I'm trying to help them. And so having that vision of like making a difference in patients' lives was really important to me. And I eventually got into internal medicine because I really couldn't feel pigeonholed into one area. I was like, I love kids, but I don't think I want to do kids. And so I definitely want to do adults. And then, when I thought about fellowships, there were two things there. One of them was, am I good enough? And the other thing was, do I really need that? Because if I do adult medicine and I become a hospitalist, I can do procedures, I can work at the ICU, I can see acute care, I can make immediate impact. I can also counsel on these chronic things that I know a thing or two about. And so that's how I ended up on an internal medicine route. And I practiced hospital medicine for 10 years. Now, right out of residency, I went into a job thinking, yay, it's going to get easier, right? That's what we all think. Yes, once I become an attending, it's going to be so much easier. I don't have to study and do this and blah, blah. And man, I was hit like with a 2x4 in the head because I went into this practice and it was a new hospital that I was helping open. There were 3 of us physicians, so every third day we were doing a 36-hour shift. And I did that for like the first 2 or 3 years before we hired help. And I could do that because it was just me and my husband. Well, then we had our twin, and the burnout came to an extreme head while I was pregnant. But then I was kind of saved because I went on maternity leave. And so that gave me like, okay, time away from that. And I was still exhausted. I was still tired. I mean, newborn twins are crazy, crazy challenging. It's like an exponentially harder.
Tell me about it. I don't know how people who have 3 do it, or 3 or more. At least we have 2 arms, so you can hold 1 on each arm. I have twins too, and it was an adventure. But yes, I don't know how people who have more than 2 do it at a time. You need help. You need more arms. That's it.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, you do, because it's. Yeah. And so you get it, When did you have your twins? At what part of your career?
Well, they're 16 right now, and I've been a physician for just over 20. So
yeah.
Okay. Well, physician, no, graduated from my fellowship over 20 years ago. So I was, like right around the 4 years into being an attending.
Okay, so kind of the same thing. Mm-hmm. And so, but the decision for that ultimate burnout came like, I thought I was like, okay, going to be recovered and rested from that burnout when I went on maternity leave. And anybody who goes on maternity leaves knows there is no rest during that period, especially if you have twins. So I went back still exhausted, and I was determined to nurse my babies. And so I was like waking up every 2 hours with these babies that were only 5 pounds and 6 pounds. And I was exhausted. And so I went back to work like that. And then like just the emotional aspect of it came crashing down within 3 days, because day 1, I went to work. They were asleep when I left. They were asleep when I came back. Day 2, I went to work. They were asleep when I left and asleep when I came back. Day 3, I was like, do not put them to bed under any circumstance. Babe, I'll be home. I haven't pumped. I'm going to nurse them as soon as I get home. I'll be home 7 o'clock no matter what. I'll finish my notes after, blah. I got home at 7:15. My husband's waiting at the bottom of the stairs with no crying babies. And I just lost it. I broke down. I was crying and more like hysterically sobbing. And my husband just hugged me and he's like, babe, I've already told you over and over again, you always have a choice. You don't have to do this. And I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew I wasn't going to do that job anymore. So I walked over to my office. I typed up my letter of resignation and I clicked send, and I had no plan, no job. I didn't know what I was going to do. I knew I had a 6-month notice that I had to give. So I had to work for 6 more months. But I just knew I wasn't going to do that anymore. And so that's the first burnout. The second burnout was more interesting because I went to an amazing hospitalist group. And I was like, yay, no overnight call. They had nocturnists. My pager was off by 8 o'clock. We had a rotating 7 on, 7 off schedule. this is amazing. And, I noticed some of the other physicians in the group like complaining about little things. I was like, oh my gosh, you silly doctors, you have no clue how hard it is. I will never complain about this. 2 years later, crashing and burning all over again. And I was like, oh my goodness, I thought I would never complain. I like, this is like perfect. But again, it just shows you different phases of your life, And so what happened is I added a third baby to the mix, and, things get complicated, and, you get older, and the things you could do, which with much more stamina when you were young, it just proves to not be the case as you get a little older, or that was my experience. So I was already working part-time in a non-clinical job, and I transitioned to that job. And so I was like, okay, for sure, this one I'll never complain about. Like, to me, I was using my doctor brain, had nights and weekends off. I had all major holidays. I had CME time, sick time, vacation time, all the things. And I burned out again. And when it happened the third time, I got so scared. I was like, what happens if I can't provide for my family? I'm the breadwinner.
Tell me which symptoms you were feeling in this third burnout. Because the first, like you were really overworked originally. Then you have this where the system, just gets to you. And then this one, you have tons of more time to be with your family, but yet you started feeling what?
Yeah, good question. So the interesting thing is I didn't recognize it at the time, because I had started having the symptoms long before and I didn't recognize it. I didn't recognize that my headaches and the migraines I was experiencing was that stress level rising. I didn't recognize that every time I was feeling like the intense tightness in my shoulder, I was like, okay, I'm going to take this off and take off my jacket and my stethoscope. It's just too heavy. Those kind of things I would do. I'm not recognizing that this was just tension and stress that was rising in my body. And so it was physical manifestations for me. I was agitated. I was snapping at people. I became a version of myself that I didn't recognize. By nature, like, I want to help people. And when I found myself like mad at nurses because they were calling me yet again, because families yelling at them yet again, I couldn't even be compassionate for them and say, okay, I'll come there next. I was more like, I already told you, I'll get there when I get there. And like, I lost my compassion and I started having like the physical manifestations, and the severe migraines were the worst of them. And
so after 3 episodes of burnout, did you ever stop to get help from somebody else, from a coach, or was it never did that?
I didn't even know about coaching. So how I made the shift after the second time is I went to a Tony Robbins conference. And what happened is, like, the universe put that in front of me somehow. I'd never heard of Tony Robbins. I didn't know who he was. And an ad or something had to have popped up. And I asked my husband, do you know who Tony Robbins is? And he's like, of course I do. And he's like, I think you should go. And I was like, there's no way I can go. And he's like, why not? And I was like, I'm working. He's like, you can get off. And I was like, it's not my week off. He's like, you can trade. And I was like, you know how hard it is to trade? And he's like, but you can still do it. Like, he met me with every one of my excuses. He met me back. And I was like, babe, I can't leave you with the 3 kids. Why not? I'm a stay-at-home dad. I know how to take care of 3 kids. And so he's the one who pushed me to go. And then I came back on a Sunday from Tony Robbins, and on a Monday I resigned from my clinical position. So, and the reason that happened was he opened my eyes to something that I hadn't seen. And that was, this is our life we're talking about. When we are sacrificing everything that is just so precious and important to us at the expense of our careers, there's something wrong with that. And here's the interesting thing. We all go into medicine thinking, of course I'm going to work medicine until I retire. And of course I'm going to work full time. And that's just a self-imposed expectation, because that's kind of what has always been done. But we do know medicine is getting more challenging. It's getting more challenging because of the outside demands, the the financial problems, the reimbursement issues, the prior authorizations, the quality metrics, all of that stuff is putting a lot of stress on physicians that we did not have 30 years ago. So it is getting harder. So the idea that we're still going to be able to do it all is, to me, a little just, I don't know. I think it's flawed thinking. Can you do it? Sure, you can. You get to choose. You get to choose if that's the life you want, or if you're going to try to find a little more balance. And that does not mean leaving clinical medicine. Honestly, if I had got coaching a long time ago, I probably wouldn't have left clinical medicine. I would, perfectly honest in saying I wouldn't have. I would have found more of the balance. I would have gone part-time. I would have recognized that that was an option. To me, it was all or none. I can do it or I can't.
Tell us about your last clinical day.
Well, so it's interesting. I don't even remember the last clinical day. I ran as fast as I could from that. I was just like, done, out of here. Like, there's like not even any like, oh, I'm going to miss this, or this is the last time I'm walking the halls of the hospital. There was none of that. Now, I will say, full disclosure, I thought I was never going to get into clinical medicine again. But this last year, in January of this year, so I'm coming on a year, I started doing home health hospice work, which I discovered is very rewarding to me. Again, my dad died my fourth year at medical school. I learned what kind of doctor I wanted to be for those kind of situations. And I was very good at that piece of acute care. Hospital medicine is helping families and patients make that transition.
I have a question.
But I never planned on it. Yeah.
Because one of the things that I found throughout the podcast and through our mastermind and everything is like, physicians are tired, right? And you get to that point where you are not looking back. However, you just proven the point that I'm finding more and more. It's like, once you find these other things that allow you to be, creative and have time and have been able to decide in your life, you really want, at the end of the day, to take care of patients. As physicians, that's what we want to do. And you went, you just said, I'm never coming back to this thing. Forget about it. And just in January, you started again, once you've been able to develop this other life that we're going to get into right now. So tell us about the transition in the last year and a half of Liz Aguirre into this other phase in your life where you've been able to be so creative and use your degree, leverage is to bring information to others, bring your experience, your life, this life challenges, to say the least, that you've had growing up and help others, to lift others.
Yeah, I will say the way I got into speaking was after I got burned out a third time. After I got burned out a second time, I started speaking for the non-clinical group I was working with. I was working with a lot of nurses. And, I know they left clinical medicine because they were burned out. And I was doing some direct supervision of them. And it's, again, a non-clinical role doing clinical documentation. And I could hear it, like, I start to complain about things that, we really shouldn't be complaining about. And I was like, this has nothing to do with the job. It's like they're getting burned out. Why are they getting burned out? They're doing the same thing I did. They're not taking care of themselves. They're sitting in front of a computer all day. Get up, take a break, go for walks, get some exercise in, take your lunch break. Don't try to push through. Drink some water. But I have to go to the bathroom. Yeah, go to the bathroom. Those kind of things. And all the stuff that I recognized that I was doing to myself that was causing harm in the past, I was seeing that. And they weren't telling me that, but I was able to see it because I had gone through it. So then I had approached my boss and I said, for our next little conference, winter or workshop that we do, I want to give a wellness talk. And I want to talk about the mindset behind it and talk about how, we think one thing and it sends us down that pathway. It was a much more elaborate discussion because there was another physician in the room with me. My boss is a physician and a few other people. And the other physician's like, I think that's just kind of woo-woo. And my boss is amazing. So she looks over and she's like, tone it down a bit, but yes, you can do it. And so then it became like the most requested thing for our quarterly little things and our big conferences is everybody wanted to hear that. They wanted to hear how I evolved, how I gained that perspective, how to get past it, how to overcome this thing. What, they wanted to know because here I am like happy go lucky and my job is more challenging than theirs and they're not happy. And some of them were happy, don't get me wrong, but some of them also were recognizing it in themselves that, maybe I should be doing something different. I've gained 10 pounds or you know what, it's true. I'm not taking a lunch break and yep, my back is starting to hurt too, just like hers was. So it started there. And then once I healed from my burnout the third time, I realized that the things that some physicians said to me that were not very nice, like, oh, there's the traitor, or, yeah, she went to the dark side, and yeah, what a waste. Like those comments were really made to me. And once I had my healing, then I realized like, oh, this isn't about me. They're hurting too. And they're not saying anything either. So it became crystal clear at that point. And so then I started branching out. Someone asked me to speak about clinical documentation at a conference. I was like, happy to. Can I give a wellness talk too? Because this is what I think, blah, blah. If I'm going to speak for free for this, I want to share this too, because this is what I want physicians to know and understand. And then when I was at that talk, then somebody else invited me to speak at another university. Can you come and speak here? Sure, I'll do that. And then that led to this one. Can you speak here? Sure, I'll do that. And then I realized through leverage and growth, I never thought I could have like a career in speaking and that you could get paid for that.
Guys, before we go on, Leverage and Growth Summit is actually a conference put by Dr. Peter Kim. And that's where our mastermind was born. That's where our podcast was born. And that's where I met Liz as well. Mm-hmm.
And I will tell you how I found leverage and growth. That was by accident too, because as I was going through that burnout that third time, I started looking for solutions. And I said, well, Tony Robbins helped me before. So I didn't go to another conference, but I got one of his online programs. And he in there is like, you must find other people who are your people. So I started looking for my people. And then I just happened to stumble on the Summit Week, which for everybody, Peter Kim does this every March, I believe. And I think it's every March, isn't it? I think.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I was like, don't quote me, but I think it's every March. And that's a whole week of free physician speakers sharing their stories and their knowledge and where they are and how they've evolved. And that really opened my eyes to the possibility, and then became like, okay, I need to get this coaching thing that they're talking about. So I did Sunny Smith's Empowering Women Physician coaching. And then it just every step of the way, more coaching made it more evident what like I could do. Things that I could not see were right in front of me. And so this is also how my podcast was born, Creating Clarity. That's the name of the podcast, because I'm talking about what created clarity in my life, the things that I could not see that I now see, and they were right there. And I used to get so like annoyed with my husband when he would say, babe, everything we need is right here, right now. Like you're just not seeing it. And I'm like, oh my gosh, here we go again. Just like my colleague said, that's a little woo woo. Well, my husband was a little woo woo, and now I'm full woo woo with him because now I get it. But that's why he would always say, you're coming with me. And he just helped me to expand how he was seeing things. And then through all these groups, I really started to accept it when other people were saying it besides my dad and my husband. And that's why things have really accelerated over the last year, is getting in with a community who gets you, who understands, and who can see what's possible. Because if you're with the people who don't get it, they're going to challenge you and say, and this is in my my first TED Talk, which we'll get into, but the naysayers are not intending to be naysayers. They have very good intentions. Ooh, are you sure you want to do that? That's risky. Wait a minute. What if you leave clinical medicine and it doesn't pan out? It's hard to go back. All of those things that people tell us, they're projecting their fears on us. But when you get in with these other groups of people who already know the possibilities, they're indirectly your mentor. They are sharing their wisdom. And if you are open to it and you accept that, wow, it really changes everything. And so
you've mentioned quite a few things. You mentioned lifestyle changes that we have to do as physicians if we want to take care of our lives back. So just the simple things of taking care of yourself, going to the bathroom, eating, sleeping, doing those things that really changes your life in tiny little changes that you do in your daily routine, your habits. The other thing that
there's one thing to add on that before you go on, and this is so important. This to me made it very crystal clear why that had to be a priority. And here it is. When we are rested, when we have eaten, when we are hydrated, our mind works so much better. So the things that were taking me hours to complete, I was able to knock out like that. We're more productive, we're more energized, we're more creative, and we have better time management. That is what happens when you take care of yourself. And our minds are saying, you don't have time to exercise. You don't have time to stop for a lunch. You don't have time to sit. Yes, when you make the time for that, your time becomes much more productive in the tail end. And so I just wanted to insert that.
I have a friend who calls it like being double booked. So here's the thing. Your priority, if you make your body, your life, your priority, doesn't matter at what level you're doing this, you make the time. So there is the time boxing, and then there you put the time for doing these things. You put your time for sleeping, you put your time for exercising, you put your time. And anything else above that is being double booked. So you're not going to be able to commit to other things if you're double booked doing those things. And it's just simple. It's what we tell our patients we have to apply to ourselves. Then the other thing that you talked about that you've talked so many times already during the podcast is mindset, which in this case, I think the best representation of that is your husband's point of view, where he did have this mindset where, yes, things can be accomplished. Yes, you can do these things. Stop those limiting beliefs that are your blocking. He wasn't using these words for you, but we know that that's what we're going. And then you go through the Tony Robbins training, and then you go through the Sonny Smith's training, and then you say, okay, these are the things. And then the third thing that you're talking about is really surround yourself with people who are like you. And as you say, a lot of us have been hurting. When you were in your episode of burnout, nobody could have told you these things, and you would have not really received them in a good way necessarily. Like you would have probably thought, and I would have probably thought too, that's all woo-woo, right? And you think, and still right now, people who were training medicine like ages ago, doesn't matter. You just have to go through these things because it's part of it. And then it takes us, all this stuff takes us to that first TED Talk. Tell us, because I saw you before your first TED Talk, and then suddenly you're landing a TED Talk, and then suddenly you're landing a second TED Talk, and then you also are in the Cardone's competition. So tell us about that in the next few minutes here.
Yeah. So again, that is, I will tell you that I just did a podcast interview or a YouTube channel interview where I share all my thoughts on the TED Talks. But I will tell you this, I think every single physician has a TED Talk in them. I really believe that. But the reason I did the TED Talks is because I really felt that, we're in a very interesting time in medicine where as physicians are exiting, I'm getting scared because I have had care and my kids have had care for, by non-physician extenders. And there is a different level of care. And, that's not saying anything bad about them other than they're doing to the extent of what they were trained. They are not medical doctors. They weren't trained like that, so we can't hold them to that standard. But with that said, it makes me concerned that physicians are exiting at the rate they are. And I know that they don't really want to exit. I know that all of us have this desire to help patients. And I came to the realization that my ability to help people was no longer just limited to the patients. I need to help my colleagues. I need to help them understand that leaving a job is not the answer, because then you go to the next job and get burnt out, and then you go to the next job and get burnt out. If we don't change the way we're thinking about things and change and make conscious decisions to prioritize ourselves, then you can leave job after job after job. It's going to be really challenging to find it when your same habits follow you. I had the easiest job, and my boss is a friend, and she would say, you know, that's not my expectation for you. You're putting that on yourself. And I was doing that because I, again, always felt like I had to work harder to prove myself. And, you know, during the COVID era, what if they get rid of my non-clinical job? And so I was pushing, trying to prove my worth. And you can never prove your worth enough. Because guess what? Once you reach that next goal, then you're going to realize like, oh, wait a minute, now I need to show that I can do this. And so my TED Talks were because I really had that message for my physician colleagues, but also every single industry has people that are hurting and burnt out and feel like they have no choice, and they're trapped and they're overwhelmed and they're becoming a person that's not them, and they're unhappy. So if we want happiness in our career, then we cannot put ourselves dead last. If you're dead last every single time, you will never be happy. How can you be? And so my TED Talks, the first one, so when you get TED Talks, you can't give the same talk twice. And it just so happens, I actually got 3 talks, and I turned down the first one. And the second one ended up going virtual, but I felt it was important to give that talk because it's talking about our imagination. And why the secret to fulfillment is our imagination, because when we use our imagination like we did as a child, it's very positive, and you see the possibilities and you explore them and all that kind of stuff. And so the question is, why don't we do that anymore? Well, we do. The problem is we use our possibility in a negative way. So that is, I think, the turning point there. Yeah.
So tell us about the process to get into the Grant Cardone's Great Americans.
Yeah, so that is interesting because I didn't even know that was a legitimate competition. I saw that somebody sent it to me because they knew I was speaking, and I just totally ignored it. And then I saw someone with a golden ticket online for the Grant Cardone Great American Speak Off. So I was like, oh, so I checked it out. They only had a virtual platform left. So I applied to that. And then I got a golden ticket to compete in Miami this last weekend. And there were thousands of people who applied, and they only took 165. And so they only took 3, the top 3, to the next round, which is in February. And I was not one of the top 3. But it was a good learning experience. Because again, it reminded me, wow, you really need to surround yourself with like-minded individuals, because there I had a very different feel from my community that I'm in right now in our medical spaces of physician entrepreneurs. The feeling there was more of scarcity and competition. And the feeling in my medical communities of entrepreneurship, it's like lift each other up and support each other and help each other and share our knowledge that we've learned. And it was a completely different experience. So it taught me, it was good. I got in front of cameras, I had judges, I did all of that stuff. And I knew after day 1, I wasn't going to advance. And the reason is one of the judges got up on stage, and he was like one of the big judges. And he said, if I were y'all, I would stay up all night long, fine tuning your talks for day 2. And I was like, whoa, that goes against what I just said in my talk. And that was, we should never neglect ourselves and compromise our health and our sleep at the expense of our careers and our goals. And I was like, well, I'm not advancing. So it's just a different mindset, and that's okay. I'm at a very different point in my life, and so I see things differently. And if people disagree with me, I'm totally fine with that, because we all have to come to it on our own. I didn't agree with my husband for the first 8 years, and now I'm like, oh my gosh, he was so right. But it's just, where we are, and we have to come to it in our own time.
So tell us a little bit about your next steps as you create this life that you're designing your life as a speaker. What what have you been planning for the next year?
Yeah. So the next year, now I'm no longer doing free events. I'm doing paid events. And so, which, I started this year because I can't work my regular W-2 job and work my part-time hospice job and do my podcast and my YouTube channel and have time for my family and keep speaking for free for everybody. So I definitely started getting on paid speaking stages this year, and I'm branching out to speak for organizations who really value helping their employees find career success without losing their happiness in the journey. And it really comes to the mindset and the health and wellness piece. And it's a win-win situation for the organization and for the employees, because they help the employees not get burnt out, not leave. And it helps the organization because when we help our employees get there, again, they become much more productive, much happier, more creative. All of those things come when we take care of ourselves and become the best versions of ourselves. So yeah, that's my plan for 2023 is I am speaking on some, I am speaking at Grand Cayman Islands for the Women Physician Wellness Conference. I'm doing that in February. I'm also doing, this is my free work that I am committed to doing, is I'm speaking for some schools in my local area to share, the benefits of that, because the statistics show that by middle school, 70% of middle schoolers are not getting enough sleep. And they're kind of falling into that path where you're trying to do all the sports and all the academics and staying up late. And it starts young. And so I'm trying to provide that education at a younger level. So I do free work for schools and speak on the importance of that and just, planting some seeds that can be watered to grow. But otherwise, bigger stages in 2023. I've had a few people reaching out to me already, and things. I want to make sure it's a good fit too, because I want to make sure that I'm aligned with what the organization wants and also true to my message. So yeah.
That's super cool. Congratulations. Good luck to all of
Thank
those
you.
things that you're doing. If somebody wants to reach Liz Aguirre for a speaking engagement, where should we reach you? Where should we find you?
Yes, I'll put my information in the show notes, but I do have a website. It's lizaguirremd.com. And then all my social media is at Liz Aguirre MD. So I'm on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And so any of those platforms, you can reach out to me. But for speaking, definitely go to my website, fill out a speaker information form so that I can know what you're looking for. And I'll just say that I only accept speaking for organizations where we're in alignment of our goals. Because to me, again, it has to feel right to me and it has to feel true to me. And it really is about helping everybody have success in their careers and still maintain their happiness. So.
Well, thanks a lot for being here. And I'm looking forward for this 2023. It's going to be awesome.
Thank you. And thank you for having me.
Thanks. Well, guys, that's it for today. Stay tuned for more of our Design Your Physician Life podcast, which was brought to you today by our Maxillary Mastermind, which actually has the next session this coming February 1st. If you haven't signed up, you won't want to miss it. We will continue to bring you useful resources to develop your physician entrepreneur life like we did today with Dr. Liz Aguirre. You can actually connect with her through her website, lizaguirremd.com. That is LIZAGUIRREMD.com. Thank you for joining us. We hope you had a great time as we did. Stay in touch with us. Visit our website, maxallure.com. That is MAXALLURE. And please don't forget to subscribe, like us, give us 5 stars, and share the love with your friends and family. See you later. Thanks. Bye.
Please remember that Design is not providing specific financial, medical, or career advice. Our only intent is to stimulate your appetite for growth by sharing our experience and those of our speakers, coaches, and guests. Your personal growth and success will be unique to your circumstances and your hard work. We sincerely hope you enjoyed the show and look forward to seeing you next week.